I'm Venus with Galaxy Inc. And for this week's writing tips, we're going to be talking about beta readers. Now, if you don't know what a beta reader is basically somebody who reads your book who's not a professional usually. So they're not usually your editor or your agent or anything like that. A beta reader is just somebody in your friend circle or some writer group that you're a part of who reads your book and gives you feedback on it. The first thing you want from a beta reader is honest criticism. It's all well and good to tell you that your book is wonderful and they love it and they think it's great. It doesn't work so well if you're trying to fix things. Now, I mentioned before that my mother is a terrible beta reader. She's a great reader. She makes me feel great about myself because she tells me all my books are fantastic, and she's been telling me that since I was little. But the truth is my books are not all fantastic and they need a lot of work, usually after the first draft or the second and the third, and so I need somebody to do a beta reading test. And my mother is not a great person for that. So what I'm usually looking for in a beta reader is I am looking for somebody who can be honest, who has a very critical eye, not necessarily an editor, but somebody who is a good reader and can point out when there's inconsistencies or when a character doesn't make sense or they don't like where the plot is going or where the plot has gone. And then they can point those things out to you, and hopefully in a way that doesn't feel terribly abrasive. I choose my beta readers based off of what I think I need for that draft or for that particular book and whether that person likes that type of book. It makes no sense to have a beta reader who hates fantasy read your fantasy book. They're just going to hate it. Same thing. I am not a good beta reader for romance books and not actually a very good editor for romance books. I can edit anything, but I don't love it, and so I'm going to be a little bit harsher than maybe some people would like, and maybe that's good. Maybe you want somebody who doesn't like it because you want to attract people who don't like romance books, and that's what you're interested in. But for the most part, I try to choose beta readers based off of what I need. So first drafts, typically, I want to make sure the pacing is okay, that the characterizations are all right, and that everything's making sense in the world that I've created. If I have a fantasy world, I want to make sure all the magic makes sense. So one of the things that I do is I often give beta readers a couple questions. Here's things that I am looking for from you as feedback. I need to know what's going on in the story, and I want you to just read it and give me your honest opinions. And that can come from comments that they leave on the side, or that can come from just a letter or email back to you after they've read it and they say, it doesn't make sense. If they can use magic here, then why can't they use it here? Why didn't you include this? Why didn't you include that? It's very helpful because they oftentimes point out the inconsistencies in my first drafts. Second and third drafts have a tendency to be cleaner, right? I'm not so worried about the characterization at that point. I'm not so worried about the world I built because hopefully I fixed that in the previous draft. So what I'm looking for then is I am wondering if the pacing is still making sense because I probably changed some things. I'm wondering if there's enough depth. So, are you seeing some of the things that I thought that I included? How about descriptions? Are you understanding what this house looks like? Did I describe it well enough that you get in your head what I am trying to tell you? Those are things that I'm looking for in a second or a third draft. And then as I get to a last draft before I start trying to send it out, I'm looking for nitty gritty. I really want you to point out, what serious flaws there are, things that you think that maybe a editor or an agent would flag as not being good. That one's a little harder, and for that beta reader, I usually try to find other authors, other people who've written books before. Now, I am part of a critique group, and so they also give me feedback. Usually it's in small chunks, but they've also read my previous parts of the book, so hopefully they can give me some really good criticism. We can sit there and talk about it. So that's the difference for me between a beta reader and a critique group. A beta reader gets your whole book or chunks of it and reads it all in one sitting, where critique, and you don't get to like have a back and forth about it, right? You have questions and things that you're trying to fix. A critique group, you're going to sit there and you're going to discuss the book. It depends on how your critique group is. We usually discuss, so we all read the 10 or 15 pages before we come in together, and then we talk about the book and we take it apart and, play around with it. Some people, I've been in critique groups and workshops where the author doesn't speak until the very end. So everybody gives their, here's the positives and the negatives that I see in the book and stuff like that. And it gives you a lot of different perspectives that way. If your feelings are easily hurt, having a beta reader is going to be difficult for you. And is because they are going to tear your book apart. That's what they should do. That's what you need. Your book is not perfect, even though you think it is. You need that criticism. Now, obviously, there's some people we would accept that criticism better than from others. I know authors who their spouse is the person who reads over their book and then tells them what they need to fix. And they take that criticism really well because this is somebody they know and they love, and they know that person has their best interest in heart, where they would give pushback to an editor. Some people, they're more open to criticism from anybody, and so it doesn't matter as much. I take criticism and my beta readers' words to heart. I really think about them, but I don't always change things based off of them. So I did do a pushback once. I sent out a book. It's a rather short book. And that was kind of the goal. My goal was to write a shorter book. I wanted to write a small young adult book in the vein of like Stuck in Neutral, almost like a novella, right? And that was my aim. And I thought it was a good book. It seemed very fleshed out to me. It had, climax, rise, fall. My beta readers liked it, so I started sending it out. And the response I got back from editors was it wasn't fleshed out enough. And I thought about it. I said, okay, well, what can I do? I can add a little bit more to this, which I did. But I disagree that it was too short, because that was kind of what they were saying, and that's what some of them directly said. It's too short. It's not long enough for a young adult book. I disagree. There's lots of really short young adult books. This idea that a book has to be a certain length is not something I agree with. And that was my pushback. I said, I'm willing to add a little bit more. And I think that, yeah, there's some places that I could add some more depth and I can add a little bit more to the plot. But in the end, this is still not going to be a big book. And I don't want it to be. That was not the aim of this book. And if you don't like that, then I guess you're not the right editor for this book. Now, that is really hard, and it took some real deep thought. Like, does the book need to be changed? Okay, yes, it does need a little bit more. Where can I do that? But I still want it to be short. And that I'm going to push back on that one, and if somebody tells me that a book needs to be longer in order to be published, I'm going to push back, because I don't agree. I don't think books have to be super long in order to be really good or to sell. Another thing that you're going to want from your beta readers is you need to make sure that your beta readers are well read. And I say that because if you get a friend who's read 5 books in their adult life to read your book, they are not going to understand the nuances of storytelling in the way that you need them to. Because basically what you need your beta reader to be is some kind of editor. And if they're not willing, then they're not willing. You also need to set a deadline. Don't just hand your book to somebody and say, hey, whenever you get to this, can you please, whatever. Unless you need to know what your deadline is. And so then you email them or you call them and say, hey, I really need a beta reader. I was hoping you'd be my beta reader. And they agree. You say, can you do it in a month? And this is important because otherwise that book might not ever get read. It'll go to a beta reader and then just sit there. I've had this happen. People offer, they say, I'd love to be your beta reader. I'm like, yay. And then I never hear back from them again. I'm like, did you read the book that I sent you? Because I was really hoping for some. So what I've learned that I need to do is that I give some kind of timeline. I would love to send my book to you, but I need it in the next 3 weeks because I have time off at Christmas, and I would like to do some writing at that time. So I would love for you to read it, but if you don't have time to read it, then I'm going to find a different beta reader. Because remember, this is a business. In the end, we are not writing books for ourselves. We're writing books for readers, and we want to eventually get them published. Of course, you can go the more professional route, which is to hire an editor, hire a beta reader. That is a possibility. That's what I do in essence. Developmental editing is looking usually at first drafts and determining and helping the author decide where to go from here. What do they need to fix? What are the plot holes? Are the characters fleshed out? Those are things that I do. And a lot of other freelance editors do. I love doing developmental editing because it's probably one of my favorite things to do, is help an author kind of start rounding out their story and really helping them discover what it is that they have. I can usually see that diamond in there, but it has not been chiseled out yet, and so we've got to work on that and hopefully work on it together. So I enjoy that part of it. Another thing you can do is join online critique groups. You can send your stuff off to people. They'll read it. They'll send back information. Try to find ones that are active and that are really, committed to doing this and have like time frames and things like that. Don't just join these groups where, you send off your stuff and you hope that somebody reads it. Okay. So again, same thing, timelines, stuff like that. You can also join meetups. I live in a big city. I know not everybody does who watches these videos, but I live in a big city. I type in writing meetups and about 20 of them pop up. So there's lots of ones that I could join, and I don't have time to join all of these. That's why I started my own critique group that kind of meets on a timeline that works better for me and some of my friends, my writer friends. But that's another option. You can join meetup groups, and I know that there are a lot of, if you're writing sci-fi or fantasy, a lot of comic book shops have groups, kind of meetup writing groups that do that weekly. I highly encourage you to join a critique group, but sometimes your beta reader is not your critique group, and sometimes your critique groups are your beta readers. So it just depends on what your group is, how much they read, whether they're willing to read your stuff, and whether they offer good criticism. I will say that I have been part of groups, classes, things like that, where somebody's written something and it was really personal. So here's my caution. If you're writing something really personal, you need to prepare yourself before you send something off to a beta reader, because they might not know your personal relationship to the story. All they know is that this scene that you wrote about abuse doesn't make sense, and they don't know where the characters are, and they're trying to wait, are you in a house or are you outside? I don't understand. And wait, somebody just came in the door. Who is it? You didn't describe who it was. In your mind, you're writing about this experience that happened to you, and it's very emotional, and it's got a lot of pain in it, but that's not what your reader's looking for. They're not looking for that. They're looking to make sure it makes sense and that the characters are all there, even if the character's you. So even if you're turning in a memoir, it has to make sense still. We still need to know where we are, what year it is, or month, or even the day of the week, if that's important to the story. So you need to, especially if the story is really personal to you, build up a bit of a wall there and say, okay, this person is not criticizing me. They are telling me how to make my story better. Another thing I caution you about is that there are critique groups that aren't good fits. So maybe you go and there's 5 or 6 other writers and they seem to hate everything you write for some reason. It's not because you're necessarily a bad writer or anything like that. It's just, maybe they formed a bit of a clique, or, they only like a certain type of sci-fi or a certain type of fantasy, and they're really super hard on the story that you wrote, or they just don't like it. Nobody likes it. Just find another group. Don't keep going to a group that hates your books and thinks that everything you write is terrible. I think one of my favorite things about being a part of a writing community and knowing lots of writers and having workshop with tons of writers is watching those stories come to life and watching them evolve into better stories and then watching them get published. I own some of my classmates' stories. I own some of my professors' stories, and it is so wonderful to watch how they've grown over the years. I wasn't a beta reader for all of them. I've done beta reading for several of the different books. I've been in workshops for several of the different books that I now own. And it's wonderful to watch how they've changed and grown. But that's also why I wouldn't stay in a group that didn't help me feel that way and make me feel excited. I would find something else. Now, if you are in a more rural area or you have a harder time finding a writer community, again, online is a great place. I talk all the time about how I go onto the Reddit writer boards and the pub tips, and they're really interesting places. There's lots of really interesting people, and people are willing to be beta readers there, and they're willing to listen to your story. One common thing that I know people worry about is somebody stealing your story. Don't worry about somebody stealing your story. One, the amount of work that it would go for them to write, to take your story, make it their own. Remember, you're usually sending a draft. You're not even sending like a final book to them. Like you're sending a draft that still needs work. Then they have to make it publishable. Then they have to send it out. So let's say we're doing traditional publishing. They have to send it out. It has to go through the critique process. They have to find an editor. And remember, this isn't their book, so they can't necessarily talk about their personal experiences with it. And if they traditionally publish still, the amount of work for somebody to steal your story is pretty high. Never mind that they can't write the same way that you do. I wouldn't worry so much about that. If you are worried about that, there are closed groups online and organizations that you can join, like writers guilds and things like that, that'll give you some of that camaraderie, but maybe you have to pay a little bit of money, and maybe you feel a little bit safer sending your stories that way. But I've also met some real life people online, become friends with people I've met on Reddit, believe it or not. And I met my husband online. So I wouldn't worry so much about people stealing your story. Especially if you send it via email, then you've got proof and record that you sent it and when you sent it and that it's yours. So, if the push came to shove that somebody actually did steal your story, which has not happened. I mean, there are millions of books out there, and this has happened like very, very small. Then they goes to court and they figure out that the person actually did, then you can deal with it then, but I wouldn't worry about it, especially in the beta reader stage of your book. So, don't worry so much about hiring somebody. Beta readers are not, I don't think that anybody should pay somebody to be a beta reader. Hopefully it's just another writer who, will reciprocate and you'll reciprocate when their time comes and they say, okay, I've got a book that I want you to beta reader, and you say, yes, I'm so excited because I read, you read my book and now I want to read yours, and that kind of thing. So be a good beta reader, give people lots of criticism and feedback. Here's the one other thing I'd say: when you are a beta reader, remember to also praise them. Tell them when some part of the book is actually working for you. If you come across a part and you're like, oh, that made me so excited, or that scene was so good that I don't have any criticism because for the past 3 pages I've just been sucked in, put that in the notes. Say, I was totally sucked into this part. I don't have any criticism for this section. Your action scene is fantastic. Give them a little bit of boost too. Even though there's stuff that they need to work on, tell them what they're doing right as well. And I think that creates the perfect balance of a beta reader, is the beta reader who can offer criticism but also tell you what is going right. Because as a writer, that's also really important to know what you're doing right, and then you can go back and fix the things that are wrong. Don't forget to press like and subscribe to my channel. I post new writing tips almost every Friday. I've been Venus with Galaxy Ink. I hope your writing is out of this world.